Welcome to the Pride of Detroit podcast, prideofdetroit.com, at Pride of Detroit on Twitter, Pride of Detroit on Facebook, live on twitch.tv/Pride of Detroit. You know where to find us because we've been live for the entire draft, the entire damn draft. We were live for all of it. We were here. We were your friends. We were covering all of it. And today, on this week of the Draft Take Purge, where you are allowed to have any draft take you wish, we will all forget about it within a couple weeks. We bring you our takes, our opinions on the draft class. So buckle in. We've started a little bit early because we know this one is going to be big. Let's waste no time introducing everyone. I am Chris Perfett, the adequate host of the Pride of Detroit podcast, at Chris Perfett on Twitter, exhausted from doing way too many hours of the draft streams. Joining me, as always, Jeremy Reisman, the fearless leader at Detroit Online, probably tired from a weekend of furious writing and editing and things of that nature.
Yeah, I'm getting better though. I think having the Lions only having 2 picks in day 3 helped. Sunday was spent mostly on the couch, and then Monday kind of right back into analysis mode. So get right back into it. Like I'm a little energized. I have some takes. I feel better. I know a lot of people were worried about me after Thursday night. I'm good. You don't have to worry about me. We'll get into all of that, but I'm in a good mood. I feel still very good about the Lions' future. So,
am I going to be the one who's going to be the wet blanket on Jahmyr Gibbs? Then, am I the one who will not call him the next Barry Sanders?
Okay. We don't need to get that. We can acknowledge that this might be a very good player without being ridiculous.
We're talking about fans here, Jeremy. And speaking of fans, and speaking of the man, the myth, the legend, the man who is probably exhausted from a weekend of arguing with people, having draft takes, and also doing teacher stuff, Ryan Matthews. At Ryan_POD. I haven't seen Ryan since last week, so it's excited to see him again. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, buddy. It's good to see you. And I saw your mug a lot this weekend because you were pretty much on stream for what was it, like 72 hours? So
so I think a combined 21, and to be honest, I was going to tap out early on Saturday, and instead we raided the UK guys, Roar the Lions, and they convinced me to jump on their Zoom, and I ended up spending the rest of the draft on there drinking.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand how day one may have led you to do some of that, but man, I'm super excited. I've been looking forward to this like probably ever since last Thursday. Like the Gibbs pick is made, and not too long after that it's Campbell, and it's like, oh man, I can't wait to talk. Yeah, can't wait to talk to the guys about this.
Should we start? I want to start on overall thoughts. I know we kind of go down one by one, but I think we have some takes to make as Brad Holmes goes by best player available by his own big board, which he has said differs wildly from what people were talking about. We have some theories about it. I still believe that when Witherspoon went off the board, it probably changed their opinion on a lot of players. I think Eric Schlitt, when he joined us on Saturday, said that he thinks that it was Jahmyr Gibbs was their last blue chip player. But I think this is, Jeremy, kind of where the rubber meets the road as far as opinions on Brad Holmes. Even today, even with the full class, there is quite a lot of opinions from tastemakers and draft experts and wonks talking about, questions particularly about this draft, questions about what the Detroit Lions are building, gesticulations to players they missed. So I thought day 2 changed the narrative around somewhat, but clearly there is still some consternation about how the Lions went about all of this.
Yeah, I mean, and it all centers around positional value, right? That's really the only thing that's being thrown around as a criticism for what the Lions did. And there's some things that I think make sense of that argument. There are some things that don't make sense. The thing that doesn't make sense to me is what, like, the opportunity cost, right? That's the whole thing with positional value. Lions could have gotten someone at a better position. But the problem is, who is that guy? Who is that guy at 6 that you certainly, is it Tyree Wilson, a guy with a foot injury that you're really concerned about? Is it Christian Gonzalez? Maybe. Like, you can make arguments for those guys, but those aren't can't miss blue chip guys, right? Those aren't. We had talked about this, Ryan. There was this perceived drop off in talent right around that 6th pick. And when Devin Witherspoon went off the board, it was like, well, unless you're a fan of Jalen Carter, I'm not sure there is a good value pick there. So I thought the night started great when the Lions traded out. And I'm like, okay, wow. I think that makes a lot of sense. There's not a guy I really want there. I'm okay with them not wanting Jalen Carter. That's fine. And then you get to 12, and now it's a different conversation. Well, who's there? Who's a guy that's a can't miss guy there? Is it Lucas Van Ness? Will McDonald? Roderick Jones? Like, there again, like Christian Gonzalez again. Like, that's, to me, yes, I understand positional value, and I'm not trying to like do a complete 180 on my take, but when you bring positional value to the table, there has to be the right prospect there. Now, here's where I'll do the 180 here is when you talk about the guy that the Lions picked, and I'm going to put Jack Campbell in this conversation too. Were there better options later in the draft? That's the other thing, right? Is the next running back to be taken after Jahmyr Gibbs? Do you guys know who it was?
Zach Charbonnet, I believe.
Zach
And
Charbonnet,
was it the third? I was going
second
round.
round.
That's higher than I remember. Sure. Okay.
But Zach Charbonnet isn't what the Lions wanted, right?
Sure.
He's not. He's a physical back. They wanted the speed guy. So Tyjae Spears, A-Chain. Those are the two guys that maybe you could say maybe they're next in line. Tyjae Spears, 81 overall. A-Chain, 84 overall. So is the drop down, let's say, from
12
from 12 from
12 to 52,
Jahmyr Gibbs,
40 spots.
Jahmyr Gibbs to Tyjae Spears or Devin A-Chain. Is that drop as big as let's say from Will McDonald to Tyree Wilson? Because if it's like that's to me, I think the math you got to do. And so I don't know. I'm not thrilled with the pick, but I 100% understand it. Jack Campbell, linebacker, next linebacker that went. Drew Sanders at 67. Again, it's like, okay,
And
is it
he's
really
he's
that
an edge
big?
guy. Like Sanders is a pass rushing linebacker too.
Nah, he's off ball.
A little bit.
My point being, yes, these guys, you could make the argument for these guys, but you could also make the argument for the Lions waiting on a similarly talented, and again, that's subjective, right? Maybe Jack Campbell is way better than Drew Sanders and Trenton Simpson, who went 86. But I think that's where the argument has a little bit of merit, is like, you could have waited on these positions and there was good value later in the draft. Linebacker is a tricky one because it's not a deep class, but the fact that there is a 2-round difference between Jack Campbell and the next guy, that to me is a little bit of a red flag.
Yeah, I can see how that could be interpreted as being a red flag, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. However, you have a team who was in strictly BPA mode, and it was Brad Holmes turning it up to 11 when it came to the strategy that he implemented in the draft. And I think you look at it from this perspective, because I think a lot of people are echoing the same sentiment when it comes to their draft grades, right? And obviously the draft is not won in April, right? Like it takes a lot longer for those things to bear out. But I think the thing that you need to keep in mind is you have all of these people who are writing their draft write-ups, and they're saying the Lions got a lot of really good players, but man, they picked them in some really weird spots, and it goes against all of the biases that you embedded in yourself in the pre-draft process, right? Like, this player should go in this area and this player should go in that area. The Lions got the number 1 linebacker at 18. Did they overdraft him? Yeah, I think you kind of laid that out, Jeremy, right?
Yeah.
You look at who goes at. I was just going to say this real quick. Sorry, Ryan. You look at who goes right after Campbell too. Maybe you can make an argument for Kalijah Cansey, but maybe they didn't really think as much about Kalijah Cansey. I know he was a divisive pick, but then right after him is like a 4 straight run on wide receivers. So when you're making the argument, who did they miss there? I don't know who that player magically pops up. I don't know if it's Deonte Banks or Mozzie Smith. So like, I kind of get that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it clearly wasn't, because like Jack Campbell was the highest rated guy on their boards. Like Brad Holmes said as much, right? Like he said it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
So yeah, but my point being that like the Lions got the number 2 running back, like consensus, like Jahmyr Gibbs was the number 2 guy. And they could have had Bijan, right? Like but I think part of the calculus has to be that trade back.
Yeah.
Moving from 81 to 34 is a huge jump. It's a ginormous jump. It's the difference between, like you said, Jeremy, Tyjae Spears and getting a guy like Sam Laporta, who I think we're kind of coming around on here a little bit. But
it jumped, like, there was a tight end run too. They got to choose their pick of the litter at tight end because of that trade up.
Exactly, right. And maybe there was a bigger gap between Gibbs and Charbonnet, right? And they're completely different running backs too.
Right.
You're very different.
So that's really important as well. And obviously, hindsight in mind, if we go into this draft and DeAndre Swift is traded on Wednesday or Thursday before the draft, I think that changes some things.
I think we'll talk about that Swift thing when we talk about Jahmyr Gibbs. The only thing I will add to it is that I think when you take the top 5 picks of this draft, Gibbs, Campbell, Laporta, Hooker, and Brian Branch, and you file off the numbers, you file off the numbers at the front, and I just say these are the top 5 players the Lions picked, and oh, by the way, they traded back from 6 to 12. I think you would still say that that's a pretty good draft. Like, you'd be like, all right, maybe that's a little high for Brian Branch, but I understand where they took him, or maybe at 18, Gibbs or Laporta is a little bit of a reacher. Oh, hey, they really loved Hendon Hooker or something. But the Lions, I think, came to the right conclusion as far as a class. They just came about it in a very different way, and it took until early round 3 to really see that strategy in action.
I want to ask the question to Jeremy, because as I'm watching the draft, it's not the running back thing. It's not the positional value thing, even with Jack Campbell. For me, as I'm watching the draft, I'm wondering how Jeremy's reacting, because I know one of your biggest fears / concerns about Brad Holmes is falling in love with his guys, right?
Yep, certain guys, yeah.
And doing whatever it takes to get those guys. Is that still something that you're concerned about?
Yeah, absolutely. No question, right? And if you were on our Twitter Spaces the other day, that's something that Eric is now. I've seeped my seeds of doubt into him, and he's a little bit scared of that because he wasn't a big Jack Campbell guy. Yeah, and listen, like, this is just something we're gonna have to deal with. This is who he is, and the good news is that he's a pretty damn good college scout, and I think he's probably a better player evaluator than most people. That said, he's going to take some swings and he's going to miss on them, and they're going to hurt. Like, every now and then it's going to hurt. So maybe Jack Campbell isn't this 10-year linebacker that everyone thinks he is. Maybe he isn't. And the reason I don't like, well, we'll get into individual picks in a bit, but like, yes, the answer to your question is yes. There is a concern here that he has a little bit of hubris here. And yes, you need to have confidence as a general manager, but that doesn't always mean flying in the face of adversity, flying in the face of just being different to be different. I admire him as a scouter. I think he's very good at it, but I think he's going to get himself into trouble more often than not when he is uber aggressive like this. Now, he's also shown signs of patience at times, right? I don't know if,
like going 6 to 12,
yeah, and thinking that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be there and Brian Branch. I mean, I don't know why he was still there when he was there, but the Lions clearly waited a while. And then, when they were 3 picks away, they traded up to get him. All those things are good. Hendon Hooker, they were patient on. But at the same time, it just feels like, and listen, there's no perfect GM out there, right? There's no guy that's always going to be patient, always trading back, always hitting on all those trade backs. It doesn't exist. It's just sometimes it feels like Brad Holmes is overdrafting because he really, 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 really likes a guy, and that's not always going to pay off. And we've even seen it a couple times already not pay off, right? With Levi.
And to be clear, that goes to his big board. Like, his big board is the guys he likes.
Yeah,
it's the guys he has decided is best. Like, it's not just like falling head over heels. It's like he's logicked himself into the certain guys he wants.
Yeah,
and that was at number 12, Jahmyr Gibbs, right, and at 18, Jack Campbell. I think we should get into some of those. Gibbs is fascinating now, especially in the light that DeAndre Swift was traded for a 2025 fourth rounder and a move up in the 7th that ended up turning into Antoine Green. We'll get to him in a second. I really like him, but I I don't want to get too deep into the Swift trade because I feel like we got a lot of words out on it, and I also feel like I am kind of getting tired of the disconnect from people who think Swift is a much better back than, or a much more productive back than he has been the last couple of years for Detroit. So Gibbs himself, Ryan, I know you've kind of been in the weeds about this a little bit, but Gibbs, I think he's a bit of a different back than Swift. I think he is a guy who is going to bring you even more pass catching than Swift is. Where that was part of the game for DeAndre Swift, this seems to be a bit of a specialty for Gibbs himself, which is, I think, great because I think that's where the NFL running back game is going.
It is. And I think it changes the perception of Gibbs as a football player when he's drafted at 12. And he, as you mentioned, is going to be such a difference maker as a receiver. I think that changes the math on how you value Gibbs, because if he does what I think they want him to do, and the, you know, he plays the role that he wants, or that the Lions want him to fill, he's going to be a guy who's going to, I mean, you're looking at a guy 70 to 80 catches a year, maybe. I mean, and I'm not saying that's going to happen out of the gate. I'm not saying
It might.
but I mean, crazier things have happened,
Yeah,
right? Like
it might.
we in a 16 game season, Alvin Kamara did that. It's not anything crazy to think, or, you know, out of the realm of possibilities. But I think when you think about Gibbs as being a true dual threat, in the way that I don't really think DeAndre Swift was, because with Gibbs, you have a guy who is a route runner. You have a guy who only had one drop in 52 targets in his final season in college. He led Alabama in receptions.
Alabama.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a guy who, he is a certified weapon in the passing game. I think the only thing that concerns me, and this is something I saw in The Beast from Dane Brugler, only reached 20 touches in 7 of his 31 career games. So he's a guy best in doses, right?
Yeah.
That's why you spent $18 million on David Montgomery. Okay. So that assuages that concern for me. Like, you have to limit this guy. He has to be on a pitch count. Okay. I know that kind of sounds like DeAndre Swift though, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, but I don't think it's going to be.
But it's different.
Right. It's different. I don't think it's a he can't take the load. I think they just didn't there. And listen, he's not going to be the feature back, but he is going to be a feature player. And that's the thing that people need to realize, because I see some people worried that, you know, he's not going to get enough touches to warrant this 12th overall pick. He's going to get like 5 to 10 to maybe 15. Like, no, you mentioned Alvin Kamara getting 80 catches his rookie season. You know who else did? Christian McCaffrey. Then 107, then 116. That's what the Lions think they're getting. And that's a very high bar to set. I understand Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, but that is valued in this league. When you talk about the best running backs in this league, it's not the bell cow back so much anymore. It's these guys.
It's Debo. It's Debo,
right,
who's virtually a wide receiver.
And so, listen, this is valued in the NFL. I don't personally value it that much, but when Kyle Shanahan trades a second, a third, a fourth round pick, and a future 5th round pick for Christian McCaffrey, I'm willing to shut up and listen. Like, I'm willing to say, okay, maybe Jahmyr Gibbs is a very, very elite special talent that is valued in today's NFL. And if he's a receiver like that, well, like, my whole thing is I don't like running backs because the running game isn't as valuable like anymore. This has a chance to break my mind a little bit and say, you know what? Maybe I'm a little too strict in my running back rule.
I'm not asking you to completely change your core principles, Jeremy. But it's funny that you mentioned a guy like Kamara. You mentioned a guy like McCaffrey. Even Ezekiel Elliott had a season where he caught 77 passes. Those 3 guys, what they all have in common, they played well enough that they earned themselves a second contract. You might not necessarily want to be that team that's giving that player that second contract, but if there were running backs that did hit, it's guys who can be dynamic in more than just one facet of the game.
And this is why they valued him more than Bijan, right? because Bijan is the workhorse back, and I'm not saying he's not going to have a fantastic career, but he doesn't fit what they need. They already have a guy that can carry the rock 15 times a game in David Montgomery. They wanted a weapon on the outside, and now they have two. We're going to get to the other one in a second. And that's the other thing I kind of almost admire about this pick is that, listen, offense wins. This may have been the 5th best offense in the league, but they weren't willing to stay stagnant. We've seen this team stay stagnant before. 2011, remember 2011? Coming off a great 10-6 year, and what they followed up with, like a 4-12 season? This team is like, we are reloading. And yes, we had Swift. Yeah, we had Jamal Williams, but we're gonna increase that. We had TJ Hockenson. We're gonna get better than that. We're gonna get better. We're gonna get cheaper. I admire that about this draft, and I know that goes against some of the things I said before the draft. But now that I kind of see the full picture, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I'm encouraged by it.
We're getting better for the future. That is something that strikes me, Jeremy, because I know one of the big takes, and I'm taking it back to our first topic again, that I've seen from a lot of some fans is like this was a win now draft. And I don't know if I see that, but at the same time, I also see a team that's also interested in using the draft now to also reload in some places.
Yeah.
And I think that sorry. Yeah, go on.
Well, I was just saying, like, it is in a way, like those first 3 picks, they're going to contribute right away. I also think that's just kind of how the board fell to them, because I do think I'm with like Devin Witherspoon was going to be the pick 6. He was. And that's a future pick. That is a premier position building for their future, which is what I kind of thought they were going to do. And they likely would have, but that didn't fall into their hands. So they went to plan B, and plan B is, hey, this is our next guy on the board and he's going to help us immediately. We'll take that too. This team I think is doing actually a pretty good job balancing help now versus help later. They're not necessarily doing one at the expense of the other.
Yeah, I kind of felt Campbell might have been more of a future guy, but it sounds like they want to play him like right now too, which I think so. Kind of expect. So, was there anything else, Ryan, you wanted to get to on Gibbs before we move on to Campbell?
Just that he's a home run hitter, man. And I think that you saw what the Lions offense looked like when Swift was that explosive back in the Eagles game, to an extent in the Commanders game. I mean, those are 2 of the longest runs he had in the season, pair of 50-yard runs that they changed the game. They flipped the field. Every team is trying to make explosive plays. Jahmyr Gibbs is one of those guys who makes explosive plays happen.
I think that combination with him and Montgomery does represent a pretty big upgrade over Williams and Swift. I will say that. I think that is, at least on paper, like, I like that upgrade. I just do. I do. Jack Campbell. Some people really didn't have the linebacker position on the board for the Detroit Lions at all. Ryan or Jeremy too.
It shocked me. This pick shocked me way more than Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, I know that sounds crazy to say, but it did.
I guess for me, I like Jack Campbell. I don't know if I like him as much as Brad Holmes apparently did, but he was always someone I kind of thought there, and because I'm like a hawk as far as being like, look, the Lions could really use some more talent as far as off-ball linebacker somewhere around here. I just didn't think it would be 18 overall.
Yeah,
but Jack Campbell's going to come in. He's not just here to take the reins once Anzalone's done or whatever. This could really be at the expense of Malcolm Rodriguez playing in this defense, Jeremy. But clearly they love what they have in Campbell. The Iowa people, especially even Kirk Ferentz, the coach, self gush about this guy a lot. He's another one of these guys who's a team captain, just an utter tackling machine. So Lions are looking for some production right out of the gate with this guy.
Yeah. I mean, listen, here's what they're thinking they're getting in Jack Campbell. They're a team captain, a guy who is going to be the centerpiece of this defense for a decade plus. He's a guy who has crazy athleticism. He's tall. He's huge. He's everything like a Matt Patricia linebacker would be, where he's 250, but he's also super fast. And I know I probably just scared a large subset of the fan base off saying that, but he is kind of unique in his size and speed combo that the Lions never were able to find in a guy like Jelani Tavai, because he was slow. Jack Campbell isn't slow. He's fast. He's also incredible dropping into coverage in zone. I think he still has a lot to prove as a man-to-man coverage guy, but what linebacker in the NFL is good at that? Like, there's nobody. And that, to me, is now my concern with the pick, is that I don't think you can count elite linebackers on more than one hand. I think there's like 5, if that. Now, if you find one of those, they are extremely valuable. And you see in free agency, Bobby Wagner, a bunch of guys shelling out a ton of money. But after that, there's a significant drop-off. And it's a bunch of middle-of-the-road guys like Alex Anzalone, like Malcolm Rodriguez, all that sort of stuff. So if the Lions don't get one of those elite guys, that's what concerns me. That would make this a waste of a pick. But they're pretty confident. And the more I read about this guy, the more I see what like some anonymous scouts say about this guy. He's got a lot of very, very intriguing traits. He showed a lot of production at Iowa, and he is a football dude. And so if this pays off, then you have one of those very rare pieces that not a lot of teams have. My question is, did you get that guy? Because they are, like I said, they're extremely rare. And no one else seemed to want to take a risk on a linebacker until, like I said, the 3rd round after this pick. So was Jack Campbell truly head and tails above everyone else? Or was everyone else like, this linebacker crew sucks, I'm not going to touch it until the 3rd round?
Regardless, we know the Lions got their guy, right?
Yeah,
like
sure did.
This was their dude. And, you look at the way he tested athletically, and it puts him in like rare company, right? I think
like a
what's
9.8, what was it? 9.89 RAS, I believe.
I think it was 9.98. I mean, he was 6th among.
Should have asked before I did this.
All linebackers since 1987. But yeah, so Campbell,
9.998, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So good, regardless, right? Here's what I like about Campbell. Okay. I love the way that he plays sideline to sideline. I think the concern, right, is you look at that RAS card, and some people want to see this like twitched up speed demon on film. He doesn't look that way. You know what I mean? He doesn't look like this twitchy guy. Like, you put his card next to Fred Warner, he's got better athletic numbers testing wise than Fred Warner. Fred Warner looks like a safety out there playing linebacker sometimes, right?
Yeah.
They look different. Okay. Now that's the thing that I'm interested to see, because if you're taking a guy that high, you're taking a Jack Campbell that high, you're expecting like a Luke Kuechly, you're expecting a Fred Warner, you're expecting a guy who can be that foundation and that solid piece to your defense, Jeremy, that is foundational, you said.
And who did he train with this offseason?
Did I say his name?
You sure did, in Luke Kuechly.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are signs all around that he could be this kind of unicorn linebacker that is only limited to, 1/8 of the teams in the NFL having one of those guys. And if he is, like, it's a great pick, despite the linebacker. The whole reason a linebacker positional value is so low is because it's so hard to find these type of guys. So if the Lions nailed it, it is worth the pick because it is so rare. The question is whether they got that guy in, and we'll have to wait and see if that is who he is.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say about the Jack Campbell pick is that I understand people's frustration with it if they start putting 2 and 2 together, right, and they see, okay, the Lions re-signed Anzalone, and they go and they draft Jack Campbell 18th, you know that he's probably your starting Mike linebacker. Okay. So that means that Malcolm Rodriguez snap count comes at the expense of Alex Anzalone's $18 million in 3 years. Okay. I hear that. I hear that argument, and I understand it, and I'm not crazy about it. But I think what we need to do is kind of temper our expectations with Rodrigo. I think he had a really good season, but he also, at a certain point, and due to injury and some other things, but he hit a rookie wall.
Yeah,
he really did. And to be honest, some of my favorite Rodrigo moments from last season were on special teams. Guess what? He still has all those special team snaps to play. You know what I mean?
Menace there.
Right. And if you're getting him more situationally, you're reducing. I mean, that guy has a lot of football tread.
Yeah, I think some people have really far too quickly ordained Rodrigo. And I like him a lot. I like what he flashed last year, but as you say, you can fall into the rookie trap real easily sometimes, especially at a position as demanding as linebacker.
Yeah, absolutely. And my favorite takeaway about Jack Campbell was hearing that when the Lions brought in Lucas Van Ness, that Van Ness talked more about Jack Campbell than he talked about himself.
Right.
So one of two things is happening. Either Lucas Van Ness loves Jack Campbell, or Lucas Van Ness knew he was going to be drafted by the Packers, and he purposefully sabotaged the Detroit Lions to take an off-ball linebacker at 18.
Those
So if this
bastards.
doesn't work out, this is Van Ness's fault, and he's a saboteur.
That's right. That's right. The Iowa guys are all snakes. There's snakes in those cornfields. Watch out.
We got another Iowa guy to talk about.
I know. And we've got another Alabama guy to talk about, too. Lions weren't exactly in love with a school like, say, the Chargers were with TCU, or God forbid, the Eagles were with Georgia. Holy God. But definitely some, I know Brad even said as much, Jeremy, like there's after night one, that there's definitely, he didn't exactly say helmet scouting, but he was kind of saying helmet scouting when he's talking about, you just know certain schools are going to put out certain quality guys.
I mean,
I just Hawkeyes.
Yeah,
there's something to say about Iowa's ridiculously good defense last year, right? And and now you got the quarterback of that defense. Like that's not insignificant to point out.
Yeah, it just I would like to stay away from Iowa's offense outside of their tight ends,
outside
because
of the one guy who was their entire offense.
Well, it is TEU, but I'm going to say like the rest of that offense, it doesn't exist.
Right.
I'm just glad they didn't get the quarterback of that quarterback. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.